Okay, recording in the main room is in progress. All right, thank you so much for the three of you that came. I do know I forgot to send out the email and post an announcement in the live learning sessions page. So I do appreciate the three of you coming and providing for me a non-empty room. Avani, I see that your message, you can still upload the project and it might take a late deduction off, but I could maybe try to minimize that, minimalize that. I can't take it off completely, but just send me an email, okay? It's not a chat box conversation. Okay, so what I wanted to cover today is analytical writing in reference to some of the things that I saw on the Crucible essay, some of the issues that maybe came up on that. For the most part, it went pretty well. There were definitely some common errors that I tend to see every year. And I want to, one of the first classes I have is the plagiarism class. And then the one of the biggest issues that I see all the time, which is the integrating quotes. I saw that a lot less frequently this time, and that could be because I had the class before the essay. So now I want to address some of the other issues that tend to come up in essays and also reference to the Crucible. So this original presentation was actually written by Mrs. Brumbelow, who is the other, well, I would say other, but she's actually the main teacher that teaches American literature. Um, and so she wrote this presentation and I just use it because she put it in our shared folder. So that means it was okay to use it. One other issue I do want to discuss briefly. I found when I was grading the Crucible essay, 3 essays out of all of them, 3 of them that I ended up marking a 0 and sending out a plagiarism warning. 2 of them were completely plagiarized. They were taken from the internet. Someone else had written them. And one of them, she was struggling to write it, but it included a lot of copy and paste, but she wrote about half of it. So both of those situations are unacceptable. And I do want to put out a verbal warning that any kind of website out there that has fully written essays, you don't know what grade that student got on that assignment. They could just be wanting to make some extra money and selling their essays. You don't know what grade they got. Okay. One of the recent, not the essay, but one of the recent assignments that had been stolen from the internet and then uploaded under the student's name was actually poorly done. There were some major errors with it. It did not fully complete. It did not follow all of the requirements of the project. So if you are tempted to go out and try to use assignments that you find on the internet, keep that in mind that not only will you get marked as for plagiarism, but the assignment may not even be good. So, and I know that a lot of students are using sources like this because I had 2 students upload the same project that they had gotten from the internet. And unfortunately, I decided to go down the rabbit hole and I did some investigating and I figured out that um, there are websites out there that have several, like many assignments with that other students that used to belong to our school uploaded and put them up there. They probably sold them, made a little extra money, and which is cheating on their behalf because they're enabling others to cheat. And then those that use them are cheating as well. And what was interesting is I was looking through one particular project. I was looking through the available assignments on there, and most of them had Mrs. Brumblow's name on them, but there was one that had my name on it, which means it was a student that had uploaded, that had created the original project for my class and uploaded it. And that's actually happened a few times. One of the plagiarized essays was one that had been uploaded to my class before. So also keep that in mind that I've been teaching this class for 4.5 years, and that's like 1 to 3 semesters a year. Recently, I've pulled it down to just the summer, and but I used to teach every semester, fall, spring, and summer. So keep that in mind that oftentimes those essays may even come up as having been in my class before. Okay, so it's just not a wise idea to go and get your assignments from the internet and upload them. I understand if you might be stressed out because it's a large course. But I promise you that the grade deduction for uploading a day late will hurt your final grade a lot less than uploading a plagiarized project. The plagiarized project will hit you with a 0 instead of a -20. If you take off 20% of 100, you can get an 80 potentially if you actually wrote the project, did it well, but just did it late. Um, but you cannot get the credit back, um, depending on how many times you attempt to plagiarize, of course. You may not be able to get the credit back for a plagiarized assignment, and then you're going to have to do it all over again. So it doesn't really buy you time. It actually damages your grade a lot. So I just wanted to put that out there that you really should not be trusting these random assignments out there, because it is actually very difficult to get them past us because of Turnitin and because of other ways that I'm able to identify stolen material. So let's get started with analytical writing. We're going to go over briefly how to write an analytical essay. And as I go through this, I'm going to kind of troubleshoot in regards to some things that students have done and the ways that students attempt to write these essays. The first thing to avoid is going off topic. And I'm going to cover that ahead of time. The first thing to avoid is going off topic and kind of inventing your own topic, especially for the Crucible essay. You were giving like 4 different choices, and each of those choices had a lot of different directions you could take it in. For example, one of them was very specific, look at Reverend Hale specifically. But others were a little bit less specific because they wanted you to analyze the changes that a character goes through. And you could pick any character. So there were a lot of options, but there were definitely at least one, and there were some other essays that tried to go off topic, but there was definitely at least one top essay that tried to go completely off topic and kind of write his own topic. And I had to have him start over because he hadn't written on topic. And part of the reason we want you to write on topic is to kind of narrow it down a little bit because there is such broadness to this topic. I thought it was interesting the direction that this kid went, but it wasn't on topic, and in fact, it was kind of not even about the book itself. It was more about other things. So, just the first issue that you need to make sure you do is stay on topic. A lot of the times we provide topics that have a lot of choice within the topic itself. So you get to choose of the 4 or 5 or 3 or whatever topics, and then to then choose, and then, if some of them may have allow choices like choosing a character to write about or whatever. A lot of students do skip this first step, and I found many essays that were just completely disorganized to the point that they lost their reader. So it's very important to start from the beginning with organizing. After selecting your topic, you want to do some sort of pre-writing to get your ideas going. Many students skip this step, but unless you are a really strong writer, you at least need to jot down a few ideas. It doesn't need to be anything fancy or formal. So notice the line here, unless you are a very strong writer. I found a few essays that I would have automatically, before any kind of editing, I would have given an A. And there was one in there that I actually probably would have given 100 because I couldn't find a single error with it except for something with citations. So unless you're a very strong writer, if you are a very strong writer, you probably got there because you heavily relied on organization up until the point where you became a strong writer. And a lot of times strong writers don't even need to or do the pre-writing and outlining step, especially if they're particularly good at visualizing. But if you're not a very strong writer, and I'm meaning anybody that gets less than an A for their predicted score on a rough draft. So I try to give a predicted score. If you were to turn this in right now with no changes, this is the grade you would get. And I try to be extra harsh with that grade because I really want you to take advantage of those edits. But unless you get like an A on your rough draft predicted score, I wouldn't consider you potentially a strong writer, and maybe you do need to make sure that you are doing your preparation and your organization. The thesis statement, this is one thing that a lot of students that I noticed, they were writing, some of them skipped the thesis statement together completely, and some of them tried to put it into 2 sentences. And the thesis statement is supposed to be, even on the college level, is supposed to be 1 sentence. And this can get difficult. It can get difficult to try to combine all of your ideas into 1 sentence. But it is a skill, but it is important to master. So the second step is to give your thesis of your to your writing is to create a thesis statement. And I know a lot of students try to do this after writing the introduction, but it really is best to do it first because it gives the rest of your essay a guiding point. And I do notice that the essays that either lack a thesis statement or lack a unified thesis statement seem to lack direction. And they kind of like wibble wobble all over the place and maybe even say something that disproves their thesis that they may have written in the first place. So the second step is your essay is to create a thesis statement. Your thesis is the main idea of your entire paper. It should consist of your opinion about the topic you've been given, obviously presented as a fact. For my example, if my essay topic is to write about what led to the tragic ending of Romeo and Juliet's lives, then my thesis would be derived from this topic. Remember that in an analytical essay, you are presenting your opinion as a fact. So that means that you should make sure that you are eliminating all personal pronouns. You should not use I or my or opinion or any of those words, because what you're doing is you're going to pretend that that your opinion is a fact and defend it. Okay. Let's just take for a very, very simple example. So I had my 6th graders every year, they write an essay about the outsiders where they argue whether or not Johnny, the main character, is guilty of murder or not, because he does kill another character, but whether it's manslaughter or murder because of whether the intention was there or not. And interestingly enough, as expected, I have students that take different opinions, but they have reasons behind it. Okay, so it is acceptable to come up with a different opinion than somebody else. You may be able to do that. For the most part, sometimes there are definitely topics where you definitely have a specific direction you need to go. And if you went in the wrong direction, if you went in a different direction, you may have misread the text. But there are some situations like that outsider's text. I personally believe, of course, that he was guilty of manslaughter, but there are some students that are able to make a solid argument for murder. But it really does depend on making sure you defend it. Continuing thesis statements. Many students have a hard time coming up with a thesis. Remember, this is just the opinion about the topic. Now, I must think about what I think led to the death of Romeo and Juliet and put those ideas into 1 sentence, which will become my thesis. The selfishness of Juliet's parents and their unreasonable expectations of Juliet ultimately led to the death of both Romeo and Juliet. Now, a lot of teachers require this. I don't necessarily require it, but I try to encourage students to do this. A lot of teachers, especially for an analytical essay, require you to include the author's name and the name of the text in your thesis statement. So if you were to isolate that thesis statement from the rest of the essay, you would know what the author of that essay is talking about and what their opinion is, to the point that maybe you don't need to read the rest of the essay, but you still will. So in this case, I would probably edit that to say, in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, comma, and then continue with the rest of the thesis. That way, if that for some reason the thesis was isolated from your essay, you could still tell what the essay was about. Once you have your thesis written, you can proceed with your body paragraphs. Your thesis is the last statement of your introduction. Every single body paragraph should help support and prove your thesis. My paper will only be about how Juliet's parents caused the deaths of Romeo and Juliet. That's it. So create your thesis from the topic you have been given. Okay. Now, Some students may try to write the essay first and actually come back to the thesis later, or they'll write it after their introduction. But if you actually know what direction your essay is going to go and you want to be able to even write that introduction correctly, it's important to write the thesis first. In the introductory paragraph, this is the first paragraph in your essay. It should merely introduce your topic and what you'll be writing at. No major details will be included in your introduction. You need to make sure you mention the title of the work you are writing about and the author's last name somewhere in the introduction, and make sure your thesis is the last sentence. Now, in your introduction, you will not be giving a lot of background information. You might give one, maybe two sentences of background information that are important for the end reader to understand at least your thesis statement. You will also not want to write any large, overarching humanity ideas. Some students do this where the first several sentences of their paragraph might have something to do with humanity and be like, oh, most people struggle with forgiveness, or a lot of people struggle with guilt, or anything like that that might be connected somehow to the crucible. But really, that doesn't, for a short analytical essay, that kind of writing is actually not a good idea, because you're honestly wasting real estate. And you're writing more than you really need to, and it's disconnected, and it kind of sounds patronizing, honestly, in my opinion. I really don't like those essays that start out talking about major problems with humanity and then go into the connected in. I don't like that personally, but I don't think it is an example of strong writing. Um, Literally jump into your topic and your text right away. Try not to go and talk about large, issues with humanity and everything. And also understand y'all are high schoolers. You've only experienced roughly a maximum of 18 years of worth of humanity. While those that are grading your essay might be shaking their heads going, really, you just said that? It happens. Trust me. Um, Body paragraphs. This is the meat of your essay. Your body paragraphs are where you're going to try to convince your reader that your thesis is correct. If I am saying that it is Juliet's parents' fault that she and Romeo died, then I have to explain why that is the case. For example, organizational purposes, you will want to have one idea per paragraph. In addition, you want to include quotes from the text to improve what you are saying is true. Let's go back over a couple of these points. For organizational purposes, you want to have one idea per paragraph. This means that even if it's one idea, but you have 3 different examples. Okay, so one of the essays that I graded had 2 main points that they were trying to make. I think it was about changing and not changing, and it talked about 3 characters that showed change. But it talked about all 3 of those characters that those showed change in one paragraph. Okay, so I would have split that into 3 paragraphs, especially because there was very, very limited evidence in that paragraph. There was only one provided piece of evidence. And one provided piece of evidence for a small paragraph is acceptable, but this was a very large paragraph and only one of the characters had evidence. So be careful with your paragraphing. For your super, super, super basic, like beginner level essays, honestly, I would expect like 4 sentences. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's what I teach my 6th graders is races, to reiterate and answer the question in 1 sentence, to provide evidence in the next sentence, to explain the evidence in the next sentence, and summarize in the next sentence. That is extremely simplified, and obviously isn't what a high schooler would be looking for. But that's what I'm saying. They need to be careful with your paragraphing, that you don't go too long. A lot of students end up providing, instead of actual solid claims and evidence, a summary of the story in a paragraph instead, and that's good enough. And that's what they think is good enough as evidence to support their claims, and it's not. Just by retelling the story, you haven't necessarily connected anything to anything, nor provided actual solid evidence. Let's say that one of my points is that Juliet's parents were pressuring her to marry someone she didn't love. Then this idea would be discussed in one of my body paragraphs.
It is not good enough just to state my opinion. You must explain the significance of all of your ideas. This is where when you will really start analyzing. Otherwise, you are just stating the obvious and relaying facts from the text. This is what I'm talking about. Students relying too heavily on summarization. Why is it important that Juliet's parents tried to pressure her to marry Paris? What significance does this have beyond it stating the fact? Well, for one, she was in love with Romeo. Trying to make her marry someone she didn't truly love put additional stress on her. She is only 14 and her parents are trying to make her grow up too fast. Forcing her into this impossible situation causes Juliet to fake her death. And I, of course, would need to explain in more detail the significance of my ideas as they relate to the play, as well as provide evidence, such as a direct quote from the play. Remember, the most important thing in your body paragraphs is explaining the significance of your ideas. Otherwise, you really aren't analyzing. You also want to integrate quotes into your paragraphs that help prove your point. Integrate, don't just plop them in. I want to go back to the play and find a quote that supports my ideas. Perhaps a quote where Juliet's dad says that she has to marry Paris or she will be kicked out will work. You should have at least 2 body paragraphs and at least 1 quote per paragraph. And that's an at least. I've seen some essays that have like 3, 4, 5, 6 quotes in a paragraph, but they may be tiny chunks. And it works really well. Okay. You may have one large quote that you base your paragraph upon, or you might have little tiny pieces that are kind of spread out through it. And that both of those are acceptable. And honestly, I see more skill in using tiny chunks because a lot of students literally try to take up real estate in their essays with large quotes, and that's not a good idea. So notice it says that you need to have at least 2 body paragraphs. So you need to have at least 2 topics that support your thesis. And a lot of students are really stuck on that 5-paragraph essay format. Obviously, that's what you're taught in middle school because it's a good place to start. But if you only have 2 and they're kind of decent size and they were very strong, it's okay. It's okay. I'm not counting paragraphs. I'm not counting words. I'm looking at how well you supported your thesis statement. Quotes. Once again, it is smart to have at least 1 quote per body paragraph. Not only do they support your points, but they take up room, wink, wink. Remember to integrate your own quotes with the quote. Integrate your own words with the quote. That's what I meant to say. Otherwise, you have what's called a freestanding quote, or what I call a floating quote. For example, Mr. Capulet yells to Juliet, "You will marry Paris or you can get out of my house." Notice that everything before the quote is mine. It can be as simple as Shakespeare writes or Juliet says. This is also called sentence framing. It's something I teach my 6th graders, and that's how I refer to it. I call it sentence frames. I was going somewhere. I've had quotes in essays where it wasn't even clear which character was speaking. And it had been a while since I had read that text, so I didn't know. That obviously was a floating quote and an example of why it's extremely, extremely important to integrate your quotes. When you're incorporating quotes into your paper, remember to cite right after the quote. If your text is a novel, you cite the author's last name and page number. For example, Miller 56. Notice where the period is, outside. Now, The Crucible is a prose play, so you can easily get away with citing it as a novel or as a prose play where you add in the act number, not the scene number, just the act number. So Miller 56-2, for example. If your text is a play that has acts and scenes, you'll want to cite the act, scene, and line number. For poems, cite the line number and the author. Your conclusion is just a summary of the most important points of your essay. No new material should be in your conclusion. Only restate major ideas. You don't want to say the same thing again, so think of another way to restate your main ideas. Remember, your conclusion is the last thing your reader will see, so you will want to leave him or her with your major points. Always write in 3rd person unless told otherwise. No 1st person or even 2nd person. Don't say you, as in referring to the reader. Only write in 3rd person unless told otherwise. Your analytical essays are not opinion essays. They are meant to claim a fact and defend it. So by writing in anything other than third person, you turn it into an opinion essay. You will always write in literary present tense. For example, Romeo and Juliet's parents do not get along. You wouldn't say did not get along. So you're not going to write in past tense. You're going to write in what's called literary present. Make sure you are punctuating titles correctly. Novels and plays are italicized or underlined, and poems are put into quotation marks. Make sure that all your essays, you're using MLA format. So these are some things that are just really kind of technically easy things to do to prevent credit loss. I saw an unfortunate number of essays that had absolutely no indication that The Crucible was the title of the play. It needed to be underlined or italicized. I prefer italicized, but that's just me. And I did actually see some essays that were not even completed, which lost some credit, but also was completely out of MLA formatting. So when you turn in your rough draft, it does need to be a completed essay so that I can give you recommendations and suggestions. It is actually very difficult for me to give you any kind of recommendation, suggestion, guidance, redirection, whatever, when the essay isn't complete. It's really, really hard for me to come up with something because I don't even know what direction you're going necessarily. So I'm going to open it up for questions in just a minute, but there's one other thing I do want to discuss that I noticed was rampantly an issue with the last round of essays, and that was missing topic statements or missing topic sentences. So a topic sentence is going to be a piece of your thesis statement that you're going to defend with a paragraph. Not necessarily just a piece of the sentence, but one of the something that will directly support your thesis statement that you're going to talk about in that paragraph. So in this example, Juliet's parents were they're technically the ones at fault. You're making the argument that her parents and the pressure that they provided on her were the fault of her death. Then you're going to want to make a claim with one paragraph. For example, Juliet's parents were forcing her to marry someone she didn't love. That would be your topic of that paragraph, and you need to include it in a topic sentence. If you don't include a topic sentence, it doesn't become readily apparent what you're talking about in that paragraph. And it also makes it more difficult to connect back to the thesis statement. So the very first sentence of every body paragraph should be a topic sentence or a topic statement. And that is where you're going to make sure that there's a direct connection. So I could say something along the lines of, Juliet's parents helped contributed to her death, contribute to her death because they were trying to force her to marry someone she didn't love. Okay, so I'm taking that thesis statement and I'm focusing on a specific example. So I'm connecting it directly to the thesis and then mentioning an example of why this might be the case. For the Crucible, if you're talking about let's say you're talking about doing the topic about Reverend Hale. And one of your first points is that he's a very educated man, and he's very comfortable and proud of his education, and how that kind of blinds him in the beginning. You could make that point. You're talking about Reverend Hale, and you say your thesis is something along the lines of, in the beginning of the play, he's very proud. And he helps find witchcraft, but eventually, he changes and realizes his error of his ways. Well, maybe your first paragraph would want to say something to the effect of Reverend Hill helped move forward the plot of the play because he was blinded by his academic knowledge and pride in his knowledge, or something to that effect. And then you would go on in that paragraph to defend that point, to defend that example, to provide evidence of that example. So missing topic sentences was something I saw, probably the most common error that I did see, and they are very important. And I provided, for anybody that would be missing those topic sentences, I provided a source on how to identify topic sentences and write topic sentences. Okay, so that was definitely one of the biggest issues that I did see. So if anyone has any questions further about essays and anything else that I can help you with, I'd be happy to answer them. So I'll give you a minute or two. Avani, it really does depend on your topic. So obviously with the topic of Reverend Hill, it would be pointless to talk about any other character. If you want to talk about a specific theme like pride or guilt or self-preservation, you could easily talk about several characters. And if you're going to narrow your topic of your essay down that much, you might need to talk to us about several characters because it might be difficult to write an entire essay on one topic and one character. So it really does depend on how you choose to write it. So if you wanted to go in that direction, let's say you were talking about self-preservation and you wanted to your main character that you talk about be Reverend Paris. You could do that. But you may want to talk about different instances where he shows that self-preservation, how that works out for him, that kind of thing. But you might be at a bit of a struggle to do that for him. However, if you were to do it about Abigail, you would have a little bit of an easier time because then you would see, well, why does she want to self-preserve? What does she do to self-preserve? And then how does that turn out for her? So the idea of the theme would then be self-preservation and how it may not be the best idea. So it really does depend on what direction you take your topic. I have seen essays that have done both, that have written about one character per body paragraph as an example of the theme and have done well with it. And I've seen the other direction as well, where they have chosen one character, such as Mary Warren or Abigail, that have a lot to say, or John Proctor or Goody Proctor. They are big characters and are able to write a whole essay about it. So I would say there is no one correct answer for your question, Avani. It really just does depend on how focused your essay is going to be. Because I have seen some students that have overly narrowed their topic. They have written on one very small topic and have really, really stressed and strained to get enough information and enough evidence into their essay to actually make it a decent essay. And I can tell sometimes, and I remember falling into this pit when I was learning to be a writer too, of picking a topic that was overly specialized. I think I did it with my thesis statement in college, actually, my thesis essay. I overly narrowed my topic, and then I had very little to go on. And that's a really, really stressful situation. A good question. Alex, what a lot of students do, I don't consider it to be very wise to use the notes, because if you upload a plain document, those notes may not show up. Okay. So a lot of students will do that. They'll put in a document and they'll write a bunch of notes, and they'll make some very good notes in the comments of the essay and stuff like that, or like they may tag notes, kind of like the way that the essays showed up graded here in Canvas. But because I definitely prefer you to upload hard copy documents of your essays, those notes may not transfer. So what I would suggest doing is maybe including the full song or whatever, like if you're referring to the song that you need to analyze on the page, and then just taking snippets of it on the next slide and analyzing those snippets. So providing a quote from the song and then what an example is of that and how that's an example of whatever rhetoric you're trying to discuss. I would really steer away from trying to use the notes in the document. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the rhetoric project, not the romanticism. For that one, what I would do, what you can do for that situation, I understand what you're talking about. You don't want to shove too many notes onto a slide, is maybe alternate your slides so that you would have your presentation slide and then your notes slide. So if you were actually presenting this presentation in front of a class, your slides that are your presentation slides, the ones that have your pretty colors and your pictures or whatever, would be what's up on your presentation board. And then the slides that are labeled notes would be the ones that you might have in your hand that you were reading. So like present a page, put your poem on it, whatever that you're trying to look at and analyze, and then put a notes page after that, which would be what you would be verbally reading to the class that you're instructing. But yeah, I apologize. I just went off tangent because I thought that's misread what you said. Yeah, good question though. I understand wanting to make it look as accurate as possible and not wanting to overcrowd the slides because quite frankly, they wouldn't be able to read it. Okay. Are there any other questions about essays or any other assignments? I'll see you ladies. Exactly. It is actually currently in the 0% grading section, grading category. So if you can choose to do it, I will take those points and go throw them on your lowest grade test. That's what I've been doing. Iris, I mean, if you really want to try to up your test scores, that's what I've been doing with them, taking the credit from it and just kind of throwing it around on projects and tests or whatever. So if you had a project that you maybe didn't understand it and you got a 70, I would throw it on that, or a test or whatever, I would throw it on that. I'm just taking those 10 points and kind of throwing them around wherever I feel like you need them, and I'm giving you 10 points for doing them. The replies are not necessarily required, but they because they're optional and there may not be enough people to actually reply to. But the original post is definitely required if you want to get those points. So if you, I mean, and quite frankly, I know some teachers prefer the optional assignments be done when they're scheduled. I don't care. And that's just me. I don't care when you do the optional assignments. So if you want to go through the year and complete all of your non-optional work, and then like, you know, on that review day at the end of the year, end of the semester, want to go back and do your optionals, I don't care. But that's, again, just me. I know Miss Brumbelow, the main teacher of American Lit, the one who gets the first course during the school year, I get it during the summer. She prefers it to be done at scheduled time, but I don't. No, I'll take it off. I can take it off. And I don't even know if that would show up as late because it's in the non. Yeah, no, it wouldn't even show up as late because I don't submit a grade for that. I take the credit and I put it somewhere else and I just put a comment on it where I put the credit. Okay, remember that was just a rough draft, Avani. You can still go in, edit it, and take my advice, take my suggestions, reorganize it, and then turn in your final draft for an improved grade. So the suggested grade that I put in on the rough draft is what would happen if you turned it in for the final draft with no changes made. And like I said, I do try to be harsh with that because I want to try to identify as many issues as I can, and I want you to actually do it. Yeah, Iris, I find that it takes more effort for me to be a stickler about some things like that than it is to just go in and grade the assignment. So yeah. But Avani, go ahead and I don't think your final draft is due yet. So if you haven't made it due, if it's not due yet, go in and actually take those suggestions and try to reorganize a little bit. I'm gonna be honest and tell you I don't remember because I graded 30, 32 essays, something like that, with so many. Yeah, no problem. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, absolutely. That's why we do the separated rough draft and the final draft, and I try to provide multiple days in between them on the schedule so that I have time to go in and grade it, and then you have time to go in and edit it. Next class is Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday, and that'll be office hours. That's what I'm going to try to do is do my classes on Mondays and my office hours on Wednesdays, unless I have a week where I really need to talk about two things. And then the wrap up class will probably be that'll probably be on a Monday too, but that's not for a couple of weeks. All right, ladies, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate not having to talk to an empty room. And I know I say that every time, but it is absolutely true. It is very awkward to talk to an empty room. But thank you so much for coming. We're all done. You're welcome. You're welcome.